Isaac Stern, you either love him or hate him, or perhaps somewhere in between, respect for a very fine violinist. Isaac Stern was considered one of the premier violinists of the 20th century. In this video we'll consider Stern himself as a violin player, how he helped some young artists along in their careers, how he may have damaged the careers of some other artists that he didn't like, how he helped students in China, how he saved Carnegie Hall, and other aspects of his fascinating life. Isaac Stern called himself a fiddle player, and he said the following: "Music is timeless, music is life, and life is music." I first came across Isaac Stern when I was living in France in my youth, and I came into possession of a cassette tape with him on one side and Shlomo Mintz, who he mentored, on the other side. One was playing the Tchaikovsky and the other the Mendelssohn, I can't remember which. And from then on commenced a lifelong admiration of him from my part. Isaac Stern was a Jewish-American violinist born on July the 21st, 1920, and he lived until he passed away on September the 22nd, 2001. He was the son of Solomon and Clara Stern. Isaac was born in Poland in Kremenets, which is now actually in the Ukraine, and moved to the United States when he was just 14 months old, where his parents took him to flee the Russian Revolution. Both of his parents were musical, and his mother studied at the St. Petersburg Conservatory and began teaching him the piano when he was 6 years old, before she switched him to the violin when he was 8, which is relatively late for a famous violinist to start. His father was a painter and his mother was a singer. His early teacher, Robert Pollack, auditioned him in 1926, and at that time Pollack was the head of the violin department at the San Francisco Conservatory. And Stern studied with Pollack for 4 years. Indeed, in 1928, Stern's parents enrolled him at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, where he studied until 1931 before going on to study briefly in New York with Louis Persinger. He returned to the San Francisco Conservatory to study for a further 5 years with Naum Blinder, the concert master of the San Francisco Symphony, to whom he said he owed the most. And so he studied with Naum Blinder from age 12 to 16. Isaac Stern actually played the Bach double with his teacher Blinder and the San Francisco Symphony when he was 15, but had apparently appeared as soloist with this orchestra several years earlier. At his public debut on February the 18th, 1936, aged 15, he played the Saint-Saëns Violin Concerto No. 3 in B minor with the San Francisco Symphony under the direction of Pierre Monteux. And after a highly successful New York concert in 1939, he rapidly gained recognition with his expressive playing. Sol Hurok was instrumental in pushing him forward. Then came his brilliant Carnegie Hall performance of 1943, and brilliant is how Henry Roth described it. During World War II, Stern was rejected from military service due to flat feet. He then joined the United Service Organizations and performed for US troops to build morale, much like Heifetz and Ricci were doing at the same time. During one such performance on Guadalcanal, a Japanese soldier, mesmerized by his playing, apparently sneaked into the audience of US personnel listening to his performance before sneaking back out. Stern's playing apparently enticed him at the risk of being captured. Then came his European debut in 1948, and Stern began to tour regularly, appearing all over the world and at all the major festivals. He premiered works by Paul Hindemith, George Rochberg and Krzysztof Penderecki. In 1960, he formed a famous trio together with pianist Eugene Istomin and cellist Leonard Rose. This chamber music group toured extensively, and to honour Beethoven's bicentennial, they performed a series of concerts around the world. Following Rose's death in 1984, Stern then teamed up with cellist Yo-Yo Ma and pianist Emanuel Ax. In 1951, Isaac Stern toured the Soviet Union, the first American violinist to do so. In 1967, Stern stated his refusal to return to the USSR until the Soviet regime allowed artists to enter and leave the country freely. His only visit to Germany was in 1999 for a series of masterclasses, but he never performed publicly in Germany because he had never forgiven the Germans for the Holocaust. What of his family life? Stern was married 3 times. His first marriage in 1948 to ballerina Nora Kay ended in divorce after just 18 months, but the two of them remained friends. On August the 17th, 1951, he married Vera Lindenblit. She lived from 1927 to 2015. They had 3 children together, including conductors Michael and David Stern, and also Rabbi Shira Stern, one of the first female rabbis in the USA. The marriage, however, ended in divorce in 1994 after 43 years. In 1996, Stern married his 3rd wife, Linda Reynolds. His 3rd wife, his 3 children, and his 5 grandchildren survived him. How was Isaac Stern instrumental in saving Carnegie Hall? In the 1960s, Carnegie Hall was slated for demolition, and Isaac Stern intervened and went on to play a major role in saving New York City's Carnegie Hall from demolition by organising the Citizens Committee to save Carnegie Hall. Following the purchase of Carnegie Hall by New York City, the Carnegie Hall Corporation was formed, and Stern was the logical choice to be its first president, a title he held until his death. Carnegie Hall later named its main auditorium in his honour. We can be very grateful to Stern for saving that historic building, and I saw the outside of the building when I was in New York some years ago, and it's on my bucket list to actually go and see a concert there one day. What can we say about Isaac Stern's activities in China? Well, in 1979, 7 years after Richard Nixon made the first official visit by a US president to the country, the People's Republic of China offered Stern and pianist David Golub an unprecedented invitation to tour the country. While there, he collaborated with the China Central Symphony Society, now the China National Symphony, under the direction of conductor Li Delun. Their visit was filmed and resulted in the Oscar-winning documentary From Mao to Mozart, Isaac Stern in China. Now we come on to Stern's ties with Israel. Stern maintained close ties with Israel. He began performing in the country from 1949 onwards. In 1973, he performed for wounded Israeli soldiers during the Yom Kippur War. During the 1991 Gulf War and Iraq's Scud missile attacks on Israel, he had been playing in the Jerusalem Theatre. During his performance, an air raid siren sounded, causing the audience to panic. Stern then stepped onto the stage and began playing a movement of Bach. This reminds me of the legend of David Oistrakh performing in Stalingrad under siege. That perhaps can't be proved whether he did do that, but he certainly did perform in Leningrad when that was under siege. So here we have Stern performing in Jerusalem under siege from the Scuds. The audience then calmed down, donned gas masks and sat throughout the rest of his performance. Stern was a supporter of several educational projects in Israel, among them the America-Israel Foundation and the Jerusalem Music Center. He was involved in actually founding the Jerusalem Music Center, among other cultural institutions in Israel. In the words of Henry Roth, Isaac Stern was steadfastly devoted to the welfare of Israel. He played many concerts in Desert Army camps as well as in its cities, and engaged in lots of fundraising for Israel. He organised a musicians' boycott of UNESCO in 1974, resulting in an end to a cultural aid ban against Israel. Despite being a strong supporter of Israel, he was also at times known to publicly criticise the policies of the Israeli government. And as well as the Jerusalem Music Centre, he also helped establish the Mishkanot Cultural Centre. And as we mentioned, he supported the America-Israel Cultural Foundation, which helps young Israeli artists financially in their studies. In 1964, Isaac Stern helped establish the National Endowment for the Arts and played with the New York Philharmonic for more than 4 decades. Sol Hurok was key in launching Stern's own career. In turn, he helped advance a number of younger violinists in careers, notably Sarah Chang, Shlomo Mintz, Itzhak Perlman, Pinchas Zuckerman, cellists Yo-Yo Ma and Jian Wang, and through the America-Israel Cultural Foundation, which helps young artists from Israel financially in their studies, he helped along Miriam Fried and Gil Shaham, and no doubt others too. But as I mentioned at the outset, there were those whose careers he strived to block. And apparently he had people expelled from America that he didn't like. And he had a clash with Aaron Rosen, which Rosen claims interfered with his career. I've made a video on this topic, which you can see here, in which I explore that controversy further. Now we come on to Stern's recordings. In 1945, he made his first recordings for Columbia. In addition to his concert performances, Stern appeared on radio and television and made numerous other recordings through the decades. Among Stern's many recordings are concertos by Brahms, Bach, Beethoven, Mendelssohn, Sibelius, Tchaikovsky and Vivaldi, and also modern works by Barber, Bartok, Stravinsky, Bernstein, Rochberg, Berg, Penderecki, and Dutilleux. The Dutilleux concerto, entitled L'Arbre des Songes, The Tree of Dreams, was a 1985 commission by Stern himself. He also dubbed actors' violin playing in several films, such as the 1971 film adaptation of Fiddler on the Roof. He was also the featured violin soloist on the soundtrack for that film. Stern served as musical advisor for the 1948 film Humoresque, about a rising violin star and his patron, played respectively by John Garfield and Joan Crawford. He also appeared in the film Tonight We Sing, playing the role of Issei, based on the life of Sol Hurok. Stern recorded practically all of the violin's literature in a 50-year association with Sony Classical and its predecessors. And he premiered new works including Bernstein's Serenade. Let's talk a bit about Stern's violins. His favourite instrument was the Issei Guarnerius, but is perhaps most closely associated with the 1737 Vicomte de Panette del Jésus. So he was clearly in the del Jésus camp. The 1737 instrument was sold in 1994. Among other instruments, Stern played the Cruiser-Fornbaum Stradivarius of 1728, the Ex-Stern Bergonzi of 1733, a Michelangelo Bergonzi, the Arma Sencra Guadagnini of 1750, a Giovanni Guadagnini of 1754, a J.B. Viaume copy of the Panette Guarneri del Jésus of 1737 from around 1850, and the Ex Nicholas I J.B. Viaume of 1840. He also owned 2 contemporary instruments by Samuel Zygmuntowicz and a modern Italian Jago Patanella violin. At the end of this video, I'll put up a slideshow of his instruments. In May 2003, some 2 years after Stern's death, his collection of instruments, bows and musical ephemera was sold through Tarisio auctions. The auction set a number of world records and was at the time the second highest grossing violin auction of all time, with total sales of over 3.3 million. In 1999, he appeared in the film Music of the Heart along with Itzhak Perlman and several other famed violinists, with a youth orchestra led by Mel Streep. The film was based on a true story of Roberta Guaspari, a gifted violin teacher in Harlem who eventually took her musicians to play a concert in Carnegie Hall. I've seen this film, but I need to watch it again. It's probably been 20 years since I saw it. Isaac Stern wrote an autobiography co-authored with Chaim Potok, entitled My First 79 Years. And in that book, he cited Nathan Milstein and Arthur Grumio as major influences on his style of playing. He was also a great admirer of Heifetz. He won Grammys for his work with Eugene Istomin and Leonard Rose in their famous chamber music trio of the 1960s and 70s, while also continuing his duo work with Alexander Zakin during this time. Stern recorded a series of piano quartets in the 1980s and 90s with Emanuel Ax, Jaime Laredo and Yo-Yo Ma, including those of Mozart, Beethoven, Schumann and Fauré, winning another Grammy in 1992 for the Brahms Quartets Opus 25 and 26. Isaac Stern died on September the 22nd, 2001 of heart failure in a Manhattan, New York hospital after an extended stay. I remember exactly where I was when this news came. I was in the Geneva hospital and spotted the news in a French language newspaper while I was having lunch in the canteen. My sister was in a coma at the time following a bad car crash. In 1940, Stern began performing with Russian-born pianist Alexander Zakin, collaborating until 1977. Revisiting the topic of how Stern felt about Heifetz, well, to quote Henry Roth, he candidly deferred to the supremacy of Heifetz, and so he had no hesitation in recognising that Heifetz was the greatest violinist. Let's quote some further phrases from Henry Roth's book, Violin Virtuosos from Paganini to the 21st Century. Roth says that Stern was a superbly gifted artist whose best playing embraced both impassioned utterances and profound musical interpretation, and says that his was one of the most significant and widely published instrumental careers of the 20th century. He describes Stern as a leading figure of violin art, a superlative instrumentalist and musician, a sponsor and mentor of younger talents, a chamber musician of prodigious stature, and also a provocative personality who in certain quarters evoked bitter animosity, even hatred. He goes on to describe Stern as a fiery, convincing speaker, a proponent of humanitarian and cultural causes, a friend of many prominent political, social and economic leaders, a man proud of his Jewish heritage, who refused to play in Germany as his protest against the Holocaust, and the prime force behind the America-Israel Foundation, providing scholarships for talented young Israelis. He describes his playing as combining the pre-Soviet school of playing with the lofty ideals of Szigeti and Joachim. His hands are described as large and fleshy, I guess similar to Perlman and Ricci in that respect. Roth says that Stern could turn on the heat in his younger years with his impulse-style vibrato and great range of tonal colours, that he was not a bravura technician as such, and was not an advocate of showmanship, but more of an aristocratic player perhaps. He had a great bow arm and used a lot of the bow hair as much as possible. He also had strong finger pressure in the left hand, which sometimes could be heard in recordings of his. Apparently he used a shoulder pad. Following his tremendously publicised Carnegie Hall exploits, Roth says that Stern the violinist became Stern the institution. Continuing to quote from Roth, his performances began to decline later in his life, while his career as a public figure and spokesman began to expand. Still, his appearances guaranteed a full house and rapturous applause, or as Roth describes it, tumultuous ovation, even when he played off form. Somewhat careful in his choice of compositions and repertoire, he rejected ones that he was temperamentally unsuited for. But according to Roth, did go on to record over 160 works. Then he describes how Stern was once berated by George Sell, who wanted Stern to get in shape. Finally, Roth states that Stern will move mountains to assist a young talent whom he recognises as extraordinary. And this can make all the difference in a highly competitive environment. In this aspect, perhaps he surpasses Heifetz, who was not well known for pushing his students forward into the limelight in the way that Stern did. And then Henry Roth says that Stern made the following comment, that the violin is a continuation of the voice. You sing in your head and you play what you hear. What we're alluding to here is the bel canto sound. This is quoting from Roth's book, Violin Virtuosos. From Violin Virtuosos, criticisms notwithstanding, when future histories of violin art are written, Stern will certainly be honoured as a supremely gifted, impulsive, invigorating, productive, driving, insuppressible, caring, silver-tongued, dauntless, and sometimes ruthless musician activist, who was also one of the most important violinists of his era. Some interests of Isaac Stern: he spoke or understood up to 6 languages, loved to play tennis, and also loved to play chamber music. And just going through some of the accolades and achievements of Isaac Stern, these include winning the Presidential Medal of Freedom, 6 Grammy Awards, and being named to the French Legion of Honor. The Isaac Stern Auditorium at Carnegie Hall bears his name due to his role in saving the venue from demolition in the 60s. He received the Kennedy Center's Honors Award in 1984, as well as a Grammy for Lifetime Achievement in 1987. The documentary of his 1979 tour of China from Mao to Mozart received an Academy Award in 1981, as well as an honourable mention at the Cannes Film Festival. He also received the first Albert Schweitzer Music Award, bestowed on him for a life dedicated to music and devoted to humanity, and gave a historic performance with the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra conducted by Leonard Bernstein, which was captured in the film A Journey to Jerusalem. He was awarded the first Artist Laureate honour by the Sony Company in 1985, and a 44-disc collection of his recordings for them was released 10 years later. To quote Yo-Yo Ma, his music transported us into a magical realm where the very best of his human spirit, intellect and passion reside. Isaac Stern was also awarded the 2000 Polar Music Prize for a unique and consummate artistry distinguished by a personal musicianship without compare for half a century, for his pioneering achievement on behalf of young people the world over, for his patient and energetic commitment to preserving and developing places where music is played, and for his uncompromising attitude concerning the humanistic power of music. Stern is a force to be reckoned with. For those in his good books who were talented players, he would push them forward and champion their cause. For those he didn't like, he could be brutal, and this has earned him a lot of criticism, including blocking people like Aaron Rosand from performing with conductors and recording works, to actually getting people kicked out of the United States. But maybe it's somebody just like that, with that kind of, shall we say, bulldog-like personality, that was ultimately needed to save Carnegie Hall. And in doing so, he did classical music a massive service. If anything else, we must recognise him for that. To quote the Strad magazine, Stern was one of the youngest of the great violinists of the Golden Age. Stern was celebrated as much for his humanitarian endeavours as his mastery of the violin. So in many respects, he used his fame and achievements in music to further humanity. And Stern would willingly sacrifice absolute technical cleanliness in his pursuit of higher musical expression. So playing with character, in other words. Great violinist. Let me know what you think of him. I know there's some that love him and some that hate him, and some that perhaps are in between. Let me know your thoughts on the great Isaac Stern.